PhillyCAM's work is rooted in free speech and uplifting community voices. Both free speech and freedom of the press are in danger across the country. There's never been a more critical moment to understand what's at stake and to understand what we can do about it. This year, People Power Media Fest centers the conversation on censorship, focusing on telling counter-narratives and creating contributions for the future of media. By emphasizing the role of the public, community media can help preserve everyone's freedom of speech and expression.
Our Constitution's First Amendment gives us the power to shape our conversation, and community media puts microphones in the hands of everyday people. It's critical to include community, public, and independent media at the table for a true democratic media landscape.
PhillyCAM is a hub for media makers from diverse industries, backgrounds, and interests. As Philly folk, we pride ourselves on living up to that standard. We are journalists, filmmakers, and activists unafraid of asking tough questions in pursuit of truth.
You don't know from 1 minute to the next if you're reading something or if you're watching something, whether or not it is actually true. If we do all we can here at a place like PhillyCAM to combat misinformation, disinformation, and straight up lying, we've done our job.
El proceso de crear diferentes medios, cine, radio, televisión, nos impulsa a superar las barreras del idioma, la cultura y las creencias. Con acceso a recursos mediáticos, cualquier persona de la comunidad puede acercarse a PhillyCAM y crear una coalición natural en donde Real Talk pueda prosperar.
People Power Media Fest is where we can envision the future of media. It's an opportunity to reassess this moment together. By sharpening our storytelling skills and acknowledging our right to media independence, we can expand our impact and rediscover the truth.
All right, we actually have one panelist who's going to join us when she gets here with her children. But we, the three of us here are going to kick things off. My name is Kelvin Phillips. I am the program director of a wonderful program called Brightness in Black at StoryCorps. And I'm blessed to be in a role that not only utilizes my storytelling background, filmmaking, but also my program, project management, operational expertise. So that's who I am. I'm actually going to start this off by having a conversation with StoryCorps' Chief Strategy Officer, Chris Norris. And I'm going to ask Chris to set the stage by telling us what StoryCorps is, and then also, because he was one of the brain trusts that actually made Brightness in Black be actually part of StoryCorps, to talk about how all that came about. So Chris, first and foremost, what is StoryCorps? Assuming not everyone here knows about it, what is StoryCorps?
Sure, so good afternoon, everyone. Just from a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with StoryCorps, ever heard of it? Okay, so a good amount. It's about a split room. So for the last 22 years, StoryCorps has been going across the country in an Airstream trailer, primarily collecting the stories of everyday people and archiving them in the Library of Congress. It started with the simple value that everyone has a story to tell and every story deserves to be heard. So it goes all the way back to 2003, Grand Central Station. Our founder, Dave Isay, put a radio booth in Grand Central Station and just tried to get people to talk to one another. And that has, over the last 22 years, bubbled into 700,000 participants have shared their story with StoryCorps, and those stories are archived in the Library of Congress for posterity. Within the StoryCorps framework are two initiatives. One is One Small Step, which brings strangers across the political divide for conversations, not to debate politics, but to get to know one another as human beings. And then there's Brightness in Black. And Brightness in Black is really about countering harmful narratives about the Black experience, while also sharing and collecting stories of joy, pride, and resilience. And so Brightness in Black was the story, the project I got the blessing to start and vision when I got to StoryCorps. It had a name before It was just an idea, and the name was pretty whack. And so one of the first tasks was to come up with the name, and Brightness and Black, I think, is evocative. And I think it makes you think about something when you hear it, because it's typically not the type of words you hear together, brightness and black. And so I think it was something that I thought about was the outcome first. What do we want people to see and feel with this project? And we wanted them to see the brightness and black, and to not always think about the hardships and the obstacles. Because typically when you're thinking about, from a newsroom context or a story context, a lot of stories about the black community tend to lead with hardships and obstacles, or what we call deficit framing. So at the core of Brightness and Black is a powerful narrative model called asset framing, which defines people by their aspirations and their contributions before stating their challenges. So it's not about hiding the challenges, or it's not about pretending that the challenges aren't real, but typically when you start with the challenges, you limit people's ability to see the full humanity of a person. But when you start with their resilience and their innovation and their excellence and their pride, you reduce stigma and you allow people to be full people. So that's the elevator pitch of StoryCorps and Brightness and Black.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And thank you all.
And just enough time for our guest.
Yeah, and here we are. We're a quorum now, full quorum. I do want to give Chris's biography because it's super dope. Chris is a dynamic chief strategy officer with a rich background in journalism, strategy, and community engagement. With over a decade of experience in various leadership roles, he has successfully driven innovation and strategic initiatives across multiple organizations, including StoryCorps and WHYY. And as I said, he is the vision behind Brightness and Black. And one of the things I will add is he's also an amazing drummer, Flood the drummer. And he can talk about that because it's storytelling. What we're going to be talking about up here is storytelling in all the aspects: poetry, film, content, music, whatever that is, however that manifests to people individually. So it's important that all of us up here are also artists. We're all storytellers, as all of you are storytellers as well. So thank you. I have a question I want you all to think about and answer after I introduce these fabulous panelists here, and that is, what is one word, when you hear Brightness and Black, what's the one word that comes to your mind? And I'll ask anyone who wants to volunteer that in a minute. But first and foremost, I wanted to introduce our two panelists, Gabriela Watson-Burkett. Gabriela is a Philadelphia-based filmmaker, producer, and multimedia journalist of Brazilian and Peru roots. She leads NT Media, a Latin-led community newsroom and documentary production hub that produces multilingual stories advancing social justice. Gabriela is currently in production on her first feature documentary, Whoa, Immigrant Mothers Tell Their Stories. And I hope that she talks all about that on this panel today. A 2025 NAHJ Adelante Academy Fellow, she has also worked at 6ABC, WHYY, and PhillyCAM, and holds an MFA in Film and Media Arts from Temple University. So welcome, Gabriela. And Reet Starwind, I just took this from what I saw that I thought was dope, so don't judge me. Reet is many things, including interstellar storyteller, screenwriter, anime creator, creative director, educator, community organizer, poet, human being, and soul. All right. We're going to kick it off first by talking about the hidden power of language. And what does Brightness and Black mean to you? One word. Anyone can shout it out, stand up, and say it. One word. Excellence. Anyone else? Sorry? I can't hear you, dear. Booming, okay. All right. All right. Others? All right. Strength. Like that. All right. Is that? Visible.
One word.
One word.
Resistencia.
Resistencia. All right. Here we are. One word. And the reason I wanted to start that off, number one, is Brightness and Black, but also words have power, and they bring awareness in a positive way, but they can also foster accusation and discord. So what we're going to be talking about here is the freedom of speech and how we use a word or words. As storytellers, journalists, filmmakers, and poets, we use word choices all the time. So my first question to the panelists is, how do you shape the words actually in your own work? How do you use word choices? How do you use words to make sure that they really resonate with the meaning that you want them to resonate with? I'll start with you, Reet.
So I actually have a really pertinent, relevant example of this. So I have some people in my work network here that know the project I've been doing in Camden, New Jersey. Has been called Stories Invincible. If you guys are familiar with Camden at all, you know that it's nicknamed much like Chicago's the Windy City, or New York is the city that never sleeps. Camden is the invincible city. And that's supposed to embody this resilience, this strength to come back from anything. But after a series of mishaps and mismanagements in the city this year, I kind of wanted to unpack that language a little bit, because the idea of an invincible city implies that the city is always in harm's way, that it's able to survive what it's been through, but that the harm is almost a part of the identity. So I wanted to shape the name. We're still in the process of relaunching the program, but from Stories Invincible to Good News Camden. Because if our goal is to tell people positive news stories about this place that they know and love, let's not imply that that place has to be filled with strife, and that maybe it can be something more positive.
I love that. That's great. And you can say, oh, well, invincible, that's a great word. But to your point, it can also be a word that turns for other people and has a different meaning. So thank you for that. What about you? Okay, thank you. What about you, Gabriela?
Yes, as I was reflecting on that question, there's so many words that come to mind, while I reflect on how I produce documentaries or how we report. For me personally, in my independent work documentary, positioning ourselves as Black Brazilians has been something really empowering, because coming from a colonial past where Blackness is always something negative, something that people don't want to be involved, engaged with, positioning yourself as Black, it means resistance. It means that I am super proud to be Black. So, during my whole life, I have Blackness questioned a lot in Brazil and in Peru. Oh, you're not Black because you're light skinned. You're not Black because of this and that. So it's affirming to say, I am Black Brazilian. And here in the United States, it's interesting to be in another context where, again, people say, oh, but Blacks are not Latinos. And they're like, wait a minute, let's not mix race with ethnicity here, because Black, I'm also Black. I'm also come from African descent. So positioning yourself as Black people, as Afro-Latinos, became something super important as well.
All right, that's great. Follow-up to this, to Reet and Gabriela, is have you ever looked back at something you made, using words, scripts, the way you're framing your films, and said, I wish I would have said that differently. I wish I would have used different words or different phrasing. Has that ever happened to either of you?
I'd say that's part of the process is if you're not looking back at the things that you've written previously and seeing opportunity to grow, then maybe you need to, stimulate yourself more and, expand your horizons and new ideas. I'm really proud when I come across old language in my work that maybe wasn't as informed or as intuitive or as kind as it could have been, because that's kind of like my margin, not for error, but for improvement. And so I'm really actually thankful that when I reflect upon older pieces, that I can see them in such a way. I can still hold space for the version of me that thought that was cool, but also I'm still challenging myself to go further than I had previously.
I imagine that's particularly resonates for you as being a poet, poetry, where every single word actually has meaning and power. So thank you. You have anything to offer to that, Gabriela?
Yeah, in terms of reflecting of, again, the power of the words, one word that it's so interesting, it's thinking about how we're going to define Latinidad here in the United States, as the communities now are questioning about the Latino word because it's a masculine gender. And if you know a little bit of Spanish or Portuguese, all the Latin words, every time that we want to say everyone, it goes to the masculine pronoun. So we don't have like everyone that's neutral, or guys that's neutral. When we say everyone, it's todos, it's them, but all the boys, but it's supposed to be everyone. So now we are rethinking the term Latino, and a lot of communities that's what a lot of communities are starting to use Latinx, so it becomes neutral gender, or Latine, that also becomes neutral gender. But as we reflect on how to better define us in this contemporary world, it also brings all these questions from people saying, oh, but Latinx doesn't sound Spanish, or doesn't sound Portuguese, or that's ridiculous. My abuela will never classify themselves as Latinx. So it's interesting to think about how we want to be modern and be more socially conscious, but how can we also be respectful and collective? It's being very challenging for us, and for me too, as I reflect on like, which word should I use? Which word is best define my community or my audience, right? So that's been interesting.
True. And Latinx used to be a word of power, but then over the next couple of years, I see it being sort of used in this way to, you're one of those people with those words that change tradition and all that. So it's a real challenge with you all to kind of, navigate that, with us all in America, to navigate words like that. So yes, thank you. Chris, I want to pivot really quickly and ask you about language that doesn't only describe reality, but actually creates it. Can you trace a direct line from how we talk about community to the way it works in policies and resources or opportunities that the community receives?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of that. I mean, I think the one that comes to mind is, early 90s super predators, and how we described black men in particular, and how that the creation of that archetype led to the 1994 crime bill, and how that led to mass incarceration, and how there had so many consequences from that word choice and that characterization. But, it's interesting because the super predator is probably the most modern example most people can relate to. But anybody ever seen the movie Bamboozled, Spike Lee's movie Bamboozled? Like, it's a powerful movie, right? And that movie was life-changing for me because it sent me down this rabbit hole into like the vaudeville era, and really started to think about how narrative started to take form after antebellum. And it was fascinating. When you think about like narrative change, and you think about black folks during slavery being described as docile and meek and humble, and then as soon as we're freed, we're automatically brutes, and we're supposed to be feared. And then they started creating archetypes like the mammy and the sambo and the coon, and we were just stupid and lazy. And that was reinforced in media for so long. And I think when you do that, one, you have to ask why. Who benefits from the creation of those narratives, and who suffers? And then why? Why do we do that? And if we don't actually recognize that that's happening, are we then participating in that? I mean, I think there's this idea that if you just get more black folks, for example, in the newsroom, that can just change the language. And that's not always true either, because everybody's not always conscious or woke, to use that term, or the idea that all what is the term, all skin folk and kinfolk or something like that. So I've been in newsrooms, I've been in news. This wonderful young lady to my right, we started in the streets at the same time, and I've seen how juvenile lifers to returning citizens, and how just that frame makes you think about the humanity in people and what they deserve. You think about when black communities are often described as dangerous places, or at-risk youth, or underfunded schools, broken families. When you put those word choices and create a context, then that does have political ramifications. Then they will send police into your neighborhoods at 3 times the rate of any other neighborhood, even if the crime is exactly the same across the tracks. Last thing I'll say, I'll never forget sitting in the police commissioner's office a couple years ago. Richard Ross was the commissioner at the time, and I was trying to get him to explain to me why they stop and frisk black men at the rate that they do, particularly for marijuana arrests when white folks smoke marijuana at the same rates, right? And he said to me, it's because of how black folks sell it. And I said, what does that even mean? He goes, well, you know, black kids be out in the street and they be like, yo, got that loud, got that loud. He goes, white people are more discreet with their crimes.
Oh, okay.
And he was a black police commissioner, right? So we are all subject to the narratives that we see, and unless you pull yourself out of it, wake up, realize the consequences, you can actually be part of the problem regardless of your skin color.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. And we all have to think about that with ourselves too, how we actually use words and have perceptions of what words mean. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. And words change over time. As you said, woke actually meant something different 5 years ago than it means now. And I wonder how many people are using woke. How many of us are using woke because the perception of what that means has changed. I'm going to pivot to free speech versus responsible speech. And what does that mean? What does responsible speech mean? And not only that, what does it look like for you in your work? I'm going to stay with you, Chris, but as a musician, you know, what's responsible in the way you execute your music and drumming as far as, is it too black? Is it too, you know, what, you know, this isn't really words, but I want to make sure that we all understand that it's words and images, free speech is a lot of things. And in the case of you as a musician, it means the way you express yourself as Flood the drummer.
Yeah, it's about the music. It's also about art. Reet and I were talking about Sora and how people are creating all these images now. And some of it's like super ridiculous. Some of it's pretty funny, but mostly ridiculous. And I think about this old saying, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. Right, or the old, you know, I come from a church background, and they would always say, to whom much is given, much is required. And so, yes, you have free speech. It doesn't mean you have to use it to harm people. And so just because you can say something and you can use any kind of word that you want doesn't mean that you should. And it doesn't mean that if you are a little bit more thoughtful, then you are woke, right? I mean, I think one of the best changes in language was moving from felons to returning citizens, because it reminds people that they are citizens and they are people and they're returning back into a community. 90% of people who go to jail come back home. And so the idea that they should be felons for life, and that's how we talk about them as inmates and these things, returning citizens gives you some dignity, right? The same with like dynamic families instead of broken families. Just because a mother is a single mother doesn't mean the family is broken. Black families in particular are much more dynamic. We got cousins who ain't blood. We got uncles and aunties who aren't blood. Right. So there's sometimes, I mean, you got people who are trolls for a living, and they want to use free speech to agitate. But we have to understand that when the people who are using language to harm us, they are very sophisticated in what they do. They have an ecosystem dedicated to doing this, and the only way to combat that is to have the same level of intentionality and insight and putting out our narratives out there. And it has to be routine. It has to be dogmatic. It has to be a part of your everyday work.
All right, thank you. Reet, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Absolutely. I just wanted to, touch on the fact that a lot of times, especially living in the modern age, we're removed from context so much. A conversation we were having last night around music is the fact that so many of the musicians you hear because they're willing to subscribe to the capitalist form of hip-hop storytelling. Now, hip-hop storytelling, or maybe it was poetry in a jazz lounge and a speakeasy back in the day, all of this goes back to an African tradition. I'm sure some of you in the room are familiar with the phrase griot. The fact that before we had newspapers and social media, there were these traveling storytellers that were the most clever, most fly, most funny person in your village, and that's how we would orate and share things with each other. And so these innate desires to talk, right, to go to lay down some bars, all that still lives in us as a remnant of the griot culture, and we want to do that, but we may not have the resources, right, until Louis Vuitton, right, until another alcohol company or someone like that says, hey, if you name drop this in your song, we can push you through the moon. And so they get to satisfy this itch that's innate that they may not even fully understand, but it's being commodified because they don't have the context of the fact that their words should be purposeful. That back in the day, there was an intention of getting together and sharing in stories like we do. And when you can remove a person from the original context, especially on a cultural level, we, like we were saying earlier, we can play into the same systems of oppression that are holding us down while thinking that we're getting ahead.
Great. Wonderful. You want to share something that way? Free speech versus responsible speech.
Yes. I think the current times that we're living in, really, it's been very encouraging to reflect what free speech really means and who are able to enjoy free speech in this country. It feels that's not really something that is for everyone. I think we can see more and more how we would like to enjoy free speech, but a lot of journalists, a lot of creators don't feel that freedom anymore, or don't feel that freedom in certain spaces or in certain countries, right? Like I didn't experience like totalitarianism growing up when, Brazil, in a lot of Latin American countries, we have a past of extreme like dictatorship. But I grew up hearing the stories. I grew up going back to Peru and seeing militaries on the streets and being very scared about it. Actually, that's one of the reasons that my parents didn't go back from Brazil to Peru, because they couldn't, right? So that means that all this generation that are my fellows, we grew up being concerned about how free we can really be, because we knew what the opposite of freedom was, and we knew it very well. So it's interesting to see some of that concern coming back in current times, especially when we see the White House journalists being pushed over simple questions, or the message being clear that foreign journalists are not welcome. So that already makes us feel as journalists and not natural citizens, or some are also legal citizens, because you can be a citizen even though you come here as an immigrant. Reflect on how actually free now we are.
Yeah. And I want to stay with you, Gabriela, because you are in pre-production or post-production or production of your first documentary.
Production.
Immigrant Mothers Tell Their Stories. And around free speech and responsible speech, you're getting authentic stories from immigrant mothers. Do you find a push to censor some of what they're saying? Yeah, like, is it too much, or do I have to worry about this, given what you just said, or are you allowing it to be what it is from their mouths?
Yes, for someone who does community center films and journalism, I have to be very honest. I'm not here for you to let's say, back my vision of things. So I need to give people who I interact with the freedom to be themselves. And then when the documentary, it's an interesting process of kind of suing, like, the narratives. And then I'm very vocal about communicating to my social characters and with my audience. That's the way I view the story. So that's something about documentary and the news being associated with reality and truth that I also think it's interesting for us to reflect. And I think it's we need to be very transparent. This is the way I see their stories. This is the life of Camila, and this is the life of Cinta, and this is my life, and this is how I want to show it to you, right? And it might not be how they will tell the story, but this is how it is.
All right, thank you.
I just want to add just something, because I do think it's worth, acknowledging without getting too political, like the context that we live in today, where I feel like, I talk to a lot of people in the nonprofit world, and they're having to think about responsible speech versus free speech. They're having to think about what I can actually put in the grant that won't trigger certain eyes and ears. And I think, like, I was talking with a few nonprofit leaders the other day, and I said, we're going to look back on this time 30, 40 years from now and go, were we really discussing whether or not we can put black in the proposal with a capital B? Are we really concerned with using certain words because we wouldn't get that grant or would be considered DEI? I mean, we are in a really interesting context where we are having to emphasize responsible speech over free speech for certain communities, mainly out of concern.
Well put. And I feel your pain because I know you're in those meetings. It's tough out there, y'all. And that's, we're just being honest and real about that. And we welcome your questions. We're going to get to in about like 15, 20 minutes or so. We're going to move to the same theme around challenging stories. First off, what is a challenging story? I mean, I can say it's challenging because, it's saying things that people may not want to hear, but I'd like to hear from you as content creators. I'll start with you, Reet. What do you consider a challenging story?
A challenging story is something that might wake a person up. I think that a lot of, especially in journalism, like you guys can all attest to this, a lot of times journalism isn't creating a narrative, it's maintaining one. So, you're going to get your handful of like really kind of scary stories that'll help you stay in line. Let me not drive too crazy on the road. I saw a car accident. Let me not get into an argument with somebody. I saw that there was a shooting. But also we're gonna sprinkle in like a birthday, or maybe like an old lady did something cute in the neighborhood. So like the world isn't completely awful, but it very much keeps you in this mindset where let me just stay on what I'm focused on. And they're, especially the older generation, like my parents' generation, like the news was their social media and everything. So they're not inclined to go look for anything that may refute what they're hearing on the major outlets, which is a shame because a lot of times you're not getting really the crazy stories there. It has to be a really earth-shaking revelation for everybody, normally before the major outlets will start to cover it with any sort of nuance. And so to write a challenging story, to tell a challenging story, is to be willing to shake up a person's perception and get them to see something that they may have been missing all this time.
Do you find you do that in your visual work, your comic work?
Absolutely. I think just by writing a fictional world where black and brown children have superpowers and have this ability to, make their dreams come true is a radical act within itself. I remember actually, this was me talking to another man that was my age, but I was talking to investors to get them on board for the project. And when I proposed it to him, I remember him saying, bro, I didn't think I was allowed to make something like this. I didn't think we were allowed to make something like this. And if somebody my age, around 30 felt that, I can only imagine how impactful it could be to a young person. And that's why my target demographic for this first story is the younger era, or anybody that still is connected to that sense of youth in their heart, that, yeah, you can make the world the place you want to be, because that's a message we're always going to need.
I'm going to give you a chance, Chris, to respond, but you're also an educator, and I think it's brilliant. You're a young man, and you educate younger people in high school and also middle school. So how do you talk to them about this? Those coming up, so that they feel empowered to tell their truths and their stories, even if they're challenging.
Start by listening, usually. I'm sure everybody in here has heard some variation of the phrase, you get 2 ears and 1 mouth, because you're supposed to listen twice as much as you speak. And there's a lot of parachute care, especially when you're in a field like education or in media, where you're doing this overtly good thing. A lot of times people fall into the trap of doing a good thing because it makes them feel good. But as I said before, you should never offer a steak to a vegan. I know they're hungry, but like that isn't what they're looking for. And so my approach to education is always like, how are you guys seeing the world, right? Like what is relevant to you? And then how can I tie that to this lesson? Because I could teach you the material, yeah, sure, but you're not gonna remember it. It's not going to click out there in the real world unless I find a way to connect it to how you're looking at the world right now.
Nice. And how are our young people doing in Camden?
Awesome, honestly. My kids give me so much hope. And what we do in our classes, we take a world issue that the kids see as important or relevant. I never pull any punches in my class. I never scare them, but I always let them know, like, hey, these are the issues you guys are going to be voting on, right, or protesting about in the next couple years. And so we take those issues and then create a fictional world that kind of plays on those themes. And so my kids can feel encouraged that there is a way to navigate these thoughts and these feelings, even if they're having a bunch of fun along the way.
All right, great. Do you want to add something to that, Chris?
Just in terms of challenging stories?
Yeah. Or let me shift it a little bit to integrity.
I do want to say something about the challenging stories. Sure. Is Sammy Kayola here? There she is. So Sammy Kayola was the first gun violence prevention reporter at WHYY. It's one of the things I'm most proud of my time there was bringing Sammy there, because I think gun violence in Philadelphia in particular is a challenging story to tell, because you do have to tell the truth that the majority of the shooters and the victims are young black men under the age of 21, but you have to do it in a way that you aren't actually victimizing the victims, and you have to create a context to understand how we got here. And so when you look at the horse race coverage of like a Fox 29 with Steve Keeley, I mean, he's the most irresponsible journalist in the market when it comes to gun violence, because he's just like, all problem, no solution, zero context. And I don't think communities are helped when you say, 18-year-old black kid shot dead at Huntington Park, no witnesses, shooter on the loose. Now on to sports, right? And it's just like what happened here? And so people were always looking for solutions. And I think if you have to tell the truth about gun violence in Philadelphia, tell the truth about gun violence in Chicago, tell the truth about gun violence in Baltimore and Atlanta and cities like that, to actually give the real context is an indictment on the system that exists. And the journalists don't want to do that because the editors don't want to do that, because the advertisers don't want to do that, because it's a truth about society that is so damning and so nuanced and so rich and so historical that they'd rather just say, it's because their families are broken, the daddies are not home, and the schools don't have any funding, and there's just not enough police, and there's all these surface issues. And I think it's one of the most challenging stories for a journalist to tell with integrity, because it's one of the hardest stories to tell by telling the truth.
How are we taking control of that to shift the narrative of that easy narrative of like, all black men are shooting on the corner who's under 25 or whatever that is?
Well, I think you have individual creators. I mean, I think one of the benefits of today's society is that media has been democratized, and anybody can be a podcaster or a publisher. It's not always, it hasn't always, produced the great results in society. But the fact that you don't have to align with the gatekeepers in media anymore means that there are greater opportunities for narratives to flourish, narratives to find audiences, for those narratives to then resonate, for people to take those narratives and amplify them, and then those narratives to inform policy and perception. But again, it's not something that you're not going to get there with one headline. It has to be, if you look at the growth of, a couple months ago, Media Matters did this story where they showed the proliferation of right-wing media and how they're growing in market share compared to the media on the left. And when you look at the way that the right is just, they will find a narrative and they will hammer it every single day. And they figure out different angles to take with it, but they will get their point across until they shape their perception. And they keep on going. Yeah. Well, there has to be that equal rigor, if not more, on the center or on the left, because the way we got here was through intentionality around narrative creation. And the only way we get out of it is through intentionality around narrative creation.
Beautiful. And
I guess you want to say something?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and this is kind of just like my challenge to everybody in this room that uses social media going forward. To Chris's point, please engage with your joy more than you engage with your anger. The stuff that does the most traction on social media is the messiest stuff, and that is by design. The algorithm rewards conflict, it rewards toxicity, and that's why the right-wing platforms have been able to grow the way that they have. Because their people are showing up in the comments to engage with it, and we're showing up to tell them that it's awful. We gotta just hit not interested, block, change our content preferences, but also when we see the good things on our timeline, because often when you're on social media and you see something cool, you're like, oh, that was nice, and you keep it moving. But when you see something bad, you send it to a couple friends, you tell everybody how awful it is. We need to shift our actions there and start really pushing and engaging the things that do bring us joy and that do inspire us. Because eventually the algorithm will have to adapt to the fact that that's what we actually want, as opposed to what it just keeps feeding us.
Yeah, and what Reet just said is brightness in black. One story at a time, Brightness in Black is going into communities to find those stories that shift the negative narratives that are told about black and brown people. We find those if one story at a time and just build and shape a different story, collective story about who black people are in communities that are reframed around joy and resilience, entrepreneurship, different blended families and different ways families are. So well put.
If I could just say one thing too about Brightness and Black and about the whole narrative, the media ecosystem too. One of the values that I still hold true, but was certainly informing the work at WHYY was the value that communities aren't just consumers of news and information, but creators of it too. There's a lot of grassroots creators who are doing the work, who are filling the void, who are trying to transform their news ecosystems one story at a time, one collaboration at a time. So it's really important that if you are displeased with your media diet or displeased with what's happening in the media ecosystem, you don't just become like a turning off the news, but you also turn off the news and then find alternative sources and support the low powered FM stations, support the blogs in your community, support the papers and the newsletters, subscribe to people's Substack who are making a difference. Like those are actionable things you can do when you see people who are taking the initiative to create and trying to change a narrative. You should do everything you can to amplify them, because I can guarantee you, from my experience, they are bootstrapping it. A lot of times they're working in isolation and could use a community around them. They could use collaborative support, and they could always use an amplifier. So to Reet's point, if you do nothing else but share it, then that's an act of support.
Thank you. All right, I'm mindful of the time. We're going to wrap up in 5 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor up for questions. How do you want your audience to actually feel about your work? I find heart is really important here. I find love is really important here. I find feeling, so it's not just a mental experience, but it's also something that touches us spiritually. So I'll start with you, Gabriela. How do you want people to feel the stories that you're doing with your production company?
Yes. Yeah, that's such a great question. And we recently had a listening session with Inti Media. That was a couple months ago. And it was really formative. And we prepared like a survey for them. We had like a screening and then collected their reactions, engaged in discussion. And that was really interesting for us to get the feedback. And one of the quotes that I got as a response was, what type of media would you like to see? And one of my favorite responses was, I want to see media that doesn't make me feel alone. Mm-hmm. And it really resonated with how a lot of us feel in this world. Even with social media, we have 3,000 friends here, 3,000 friends but people seek counseling on ChatGPT. That's extremely sad. That speaks to the loneliness and the lack of community a lot of people feel. So understanding and feeling that we belong and that we have a community has something that really became meaningful to us. I think
it's beautiful. Reet, you want to add to that?
Actually, to piggyback on that, I want my work to feel like home for the people that need it. I'm sure all of us can remember how we felt during the COVID pandemic, but I think during that time we got reminded how important art is, because people were catching up on TV shows and movies and listening to music. When the world shut off, art kept us warm for such a long time. And that's the feeling that I want to match. I want this to be a show that, like, when you're not having the best day, you can put this on and it'll help bring you back to center.
You have anything to add, Chris, or you're?
Oh, I would just probably say curious. I want my work to make you feel curious. I don't really care about agreement and disagreement. I think actually we put too much premium on whether people agree with us or not. I think my work, I want it to be thought-provoking. I want it to make you think about something in your own self, and maybe it sparks a thought, and maybe it sparks your own piece of writing or your own piece of content. And then I just hope that I present a worldview that maybe you haven't thought of before, and it makes you just sit with it for a second before you respond. I think one of the challenges with free speech and conversations and everything is really, at StoryCorps, it's about listen, honor, share. The act of listening is an act of love. And we don't really listen anymore. We listen to respond to, like, we are already thinking about what someone is going, what our response is when someone's talking. So we're not actually listening to understand, we're not listening to be empathetic, we're listening to win. And I think that idea of winning is costing us a lot.
That's wonderful. I'm going to turn it over to you all in a second, but one of the things I want to do first is thank PhillyCAM for inviting StoryCorps to put together this panel. Y'all are the best. And thank you to the crew, all of the crew doing their work behind the scenes. You all are wonderful. You've done a great job today, as always. And PPM Fest, I hope you all are enjoying this. It's beautiful, and it's my first one, but not my last one. So it's wonderful. And it's just wonderful to be in this full room, standing room only back there. Who knew? It's great. So thank you all. It's Saturday. There's a lot of places you can be, but you're right here, right now. We really, really appreciate that. So thank you all, audience. With that said, I would love to get questions, also any comments that you have. Trying to figure out the best way to do this. It's kind of a small room. Yes, we'll have Chris run the mic around. And introduce yourself. Let us know if you're a content creator, what you do, who you are, and then ask a question.
Yes, my name is Bogdan Pechenyak. This year I started a kind of podcast / YouTube channel, more of a podcast format really, me talking into camera, but dedicated to philosophy, Ukrainian culture, that's where I come from. And I wanted, actually, my question is, I want to challenge something you said, just a clarification, because when you say we have to be dogmatic, that pushed my button, because I'm actually very opposed to dogmatic thinking in general. So I want to just challenge you and clarify, what did you mean by that, dogmatic? Because to use an example, there's Fox News. You don't defeat Fox News by acting like them, because you're just kind of contributing to the problem, like MSNBC sometimes criticized for being Fox News for the left, to use that example. So truth that's more difficult to deliver truth, because lying and embellishing things is easier than actually telling the truth.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, if you could,
I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. I actually meant dogged, not dogmatic, so that was a misspeak. So I appreciate you giving me the chance to clarify.
No, just answer. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you were.
Oh, sure.
We have one over here too.
Okay.
All right. Yes.
First of all, my name is Brenda Hernandez. Thank you guys so much for sharing so much information. I do want to ask, between you guys talked about free speech and also being woke. I come with a background of community organizing. Most of the people that I come across to as leaderships has been woke oppressing me a lot, which means that they share information, but because I didn't know back in the time, they kind of oppressed to me, saying you didn't know this, and now you need to know, and also you need to get informed. And instead of kind of pushing me to get more information, it kind of reversed back into you know what, I don't think that's what I want. So knowing the story that you guys have shared, have you experienced acknowledging yourself, saying oh, I shouldn't put people into this, but I really appreciate Reet, you saying that youth will tell me what they want to hear sometimes. So thank you for that, for the panelists.
Of course. Okay. So the question is, have you ever experienced your own, oh, I shouldn't say this because the young people will actually say it better than me? Anyone want to answer that, or is that just a comment?
No, I think it's a good point. I think that it's our responsibility as the people, I'd say, in the 20s and 40s to kind of alchemize the energy that's going in both directions, right? We need to be able to operate in a way that is, hearing out the youth because they're going to be the ones to inherit our spot, but also in a way that we could explain it to the elders as well. Because so often we kind of get siloed. The kids don't think any grown folks care about what they think. The grown folks think that the kids think that they're corny, and the elders feel like they're just completely checked out. So I think if we can make that one of our just kind of like our goals and our mindsets to operate in a way that satisfies the past, the present, and the future, we can try to eliminate things like that and just make people feel more heard and understood altogether.
Thank you. And I have to remind myself that with my own kids. I was young once too, and I remember my perception of what my parents used to tell me, wah, 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 that sort of thing. So it's cyclical.
Oh, sorry. I was actually just reminded of it. I caught the PACO train over here, and getting off the train was a group of young black and brown men, and they're on there being a lot. I'm not going to pretend that they were behaving well, but at the same time, seeing kind of like just the judgmental looks from people on the train that may not be able to relate to. I remember us being this age.
Exactly.
I had friends that were just as bad, if not worse, and somehow they're parents now. So, you kind of just got to give people the grace to be that version of themselves. We were talking about that earlier too, because that if they have the safety to get, all that energy out when they're younger, that's what helps them act right when they get older, because they're not always chasing that itch of feeling seen for acting out. We're always just judge kids for being bad, but it's always in response to something. Maybe if they had something that made them feel more seen and heard, they wouldn't act out as much.
Gabriela, you're a young, yes. You're a younger mother with young children. How do you interact with them as a content creator? And, you're putting your voice out in the world, and you see them and what's their future.
Yes, thank you, because I was exactly thinking about that, right? People know what they want even when they are babies and kids. Mm-hmm. It's just interesting to be a mom now and, wow, just be mesmerized by the complexities of motherhood, by the lack of support, but also the intelligence of kids, right? My 4-year-old, she's able to communicate what she needs. Young people and teenagers, they know what they want and they understand. So that was some of the most beautiful learnings is like respect people, and they don't assume that they don't know or that they don't understand. And so that brings to a lot of so much like collaboration. Right? That's how we're trying to do with Intimedia. Also our community, let's create the news together. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's involve them. Don't assume they don't understand news. That's just unnecessary. Right? And harming to us as creators. Mm-hmm. There's so much that you learn by just putting yourself as a collaborator instead of someone who is trying to teach or impose something.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes, right there. To the right there.
Thanks. My name's Isaiah Agu. My background's in marketing. I'm a little theoretical, so kind of bear with me as I kind of pose this question. But something that I ran into when I was working with a company that did anti-oppression work in schools, so like around restorative practices, stuff like that, was as we were kind of trying to figure out how to frame the work, something that I noticed, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase the quote, but is that the awakening needs of all people isn't always to have all the information. And so sometimes I wonder when we're in spaces like this, and thankfully all of you are doing something creative, so I think it kind of bridges that gap, but everyone here is kind of, pretty much here to hear the speech about speech, the meta speech, the meta talk. But for those who that's not their way of finding change, of moving forward, how do you all broach that? How do you all approach that, that kind of fourth wall of telling the story without having to tell the story in an intellectual way? So yeah, that's just a question.
It's a great question. I mean,
it is a great question.
I think it's about knowing who your audience is. I think if I go on WHYY radio to talk about gun violence. I'm probably going to talk about it differently if I'm sitting with Cherry Gregg or WHY versus Lorraine Ballard Moore at Power 99. I understand who's listening to Power 99. I understand the age demographic. I understand the attention span. So again, going back to the word intentionality, right? You have to be super intentional, and you have to, as you know, in marketing, you can't take one message and make it fit for all, right? If you have a message for your general audience, you have to have a message for your internal stakeholders. You have to have a message for your board. You have to have a message for the other demographic you're trying to reach. And so, thinking about what's the big narrative that you're trying to drive home, and then how do you frame that in ways that make it digestible to who you're trying to reach? And it has to be the same way you would take to a marketing or advertising approach. You have to know who your target is, you have to speak in the language they understand, and you have to do it more than once.
Yeah, that's it. And we have content fellows and the fellowship on the Brightness in Black young people who are right out of college. One of them may be in the room now. There's Vanita right there shooting around. And they're wonderful. But I observe them and how they interact with me as this grown-up, and how they interact with themselves. And it's a different language almost. They have a different way that they speak with each other, how they ingest each other's words, how they tell stories to each other. That's different from mine, which they probably think is more formalized. So to echo what Chris says, just know your audience.
One quick thing
learn
I just
your
say,
audience.
One quick thing I just say, to make it less theoretical, tie it right to Brightness in Black. When we started Brightness in Black, we had Travian Shorters come in and do a training on asset framing as a narrative tool, right? And again, when we started talking about this work, we said, asset framing is about defining people by their aspirations and their contributions before acknowledging their challenges, which is the opposite of deficit framing. You can't go into a school talking about asset framing and deficit framing. That is just too super intellectual. And so we've actually put together like lesson plans and toolkits that don't use that word at all. And we train our facilitators when they're talking to people coming into the StoryCorps booth, don't say that word. It's just going to spark more questions than you have answers. They're not going to understand it. It's not accessible. And so how do you create language that drives home what that is without using that word?
And just to add to that you guys were thinking, meet people where they are. As we discussed, for example, the next how to package civic engagement, and Ariane is here to testify about it. How do you make people care about elections, municipal elections? How do you make the youth engage with that? And then we're like, they're not gonna read this long article, but if you go to TikTok, they're gonna find us there. So we need to meet them, where they are, and then they will respond to that.
Yes.
Just last thing on that is I heard somebody say once, and I try to stand by this, if you can't explain it to a second grader, you don't understand it well enough. So have the version of it that has all the vocab words on it, but have a version that will just be instantly transmissible, and you'll find that those two working together will get to both audiences.
Yeah. And to echo that, as a filmmaker, show your work to somebody 10 years old, and they'll tell you the truth about your work. It doesn't even matter what your film is about. They'll tell you whether it's good or not.
Yes, I heard that mine was boring and needed some effects. There were no special effects in this documentary.
Did you use a fight scene or something, some kung fu?
Yes, maybe.
I'm gonna get this gentleman with the really nice camera in the front here.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Emil. I'm a co-reporter and photographer. I apologize in advance. It's difficult for me to articulate this question. But just as a whole, thinking about, what you all have been saying, Brightness in Black, also understanding that Blackness is not a monolith and that there are many different cultures and subcultures within Blackness. How do you, as storytellers, as narrative makers, think about targeting or think about accessing different aspects of Blackness? And that may be an oversimplification of what I'm trying to say, but it's like, thinking about trying to bring Black people together. Like I'm not Latino black. I don't have a land to correlate my blackness. My blackness is rooted in the history of being black in America versus someone who is just black in America today with today's context. How do you differentiate between, in creating these narratives, blackness today versus bringing the various cultures of blackness globally together?
Yeah. If I could translate, just and you guys can answer, because we talked about translate. Are you basically asking how do you, as storytellers, amplify the multiplicity of identities within the spectrum of blackness?
Not so much the multiplicities of identities, but differentiating global blackness versus blackness in America.
I think I'm going to do a quick answer because I went to Howard University, and one of the things there is you get Pan-African on day one. There's people from Africa, there's people from Europe who happen to be black, there are people from South Americas, and it's just black. And then there are also white people and Asian people as well. And you start to understand that the complexity of what it is to be black, the diaspora of it, is what's beautiful about it. So you don't have to try to find the one truth that says what black is. Black is everything. It's what we are. Gabriela mentioned that during her introduction of like, she's black, but she's from Peru and she's from Brazil, and they may look at her and say, you're not black. But she's black. She's identifying as black. So I would offer that we don't have to find a one truth of blackness or the monolith, as you say. It's a complexity of what we are. It's as complex as the shirt that I'm wearing or that Chris has on there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I understand that there is a complexity, but just what does that look like in your storytelling?
It looks like us going in communities and finding one story over there that has a certain family that is LGBT family that happens to be black. Another family over there of a chosen family of someone who just got out of incarceration that found his family or her family that are other people who were incarcerated. That's their family. Those are two different ways of family, but they are both. The connection being is their families and how we actually manifest it to ourselves.
Yeah, I think the approach is to not limit blackness or not to constrain it. That was something, so my organization is called Watu-Moja. It's a Swahili phrase that means one people. And that's the whole approach that we have. So I've gotten to travel to Kenya and to Guatemala, to places that maybe you might not always commonly associate blackness. But what you'll realize is the stories in all these places are a lot more in common than they are different. And it's actually part of the systematic oppression that these people operate in silos and don't realize how much they have in common. Because if we did, we'd start moving together. I always remember when we got to Kenya, we were like, hey, we were under the impression that continental Africans don't like African Americans because we're not as traditional as you guys. And I'm sure anybody in here that's Latino or Asian or anywhere else American kind of has this divide between the motherland and, the transplant. But I remember them telling us that they were told a narrative that American blacks don't like them because we weren't strong enough to save them from slavery. And it's just like, no, that's awful. Like, why would someone ever think that? But the fact that they're over there operating that way because of one narrative and we're operating because of another one, until we have the conversations, we're not able to break down that wall.
For my storytelling, I would say that understanding nuance. So that's the way that I perceive the world as someone who identifies as Afro-Latina, black woman, someone who travels, someone who has certain privileges, and that's the way I see the world. But then when I go to communicate, to do my work as a journalist or a documentarist, I give people the opportunity to tell me how they identify themselves, and why, and understand the context, right? There are so many things, as I was reporting on, Afro-Brazilian issues, and I will sit with folks and we'll talk about the importance of being Afro-Brazilian, and they'll be, but I'm not, I can't speak to that because I'm not black, I'm not Afro-Brazilian. But when you look at those folks, they have a lot of teachers of Afro-Latinos, right? I will say, oh, you are part of the Afro-Brazilian community. Actually, black in Brazil, it's pardos and negros, which mean mixed and black folks. But I cannot say, hey, you should identify yourself as Afro-Brazilian. That's like crossing the border. Mm-hmm. There is an author in Brazil that says, becoming black. It's not about being Afro-Brazilian in a lot of cases. It's not understanding that you're black, but it's a journey to get there. So I need to offer that respect to folks, and when I go to do my work. So just understanding nuance has been really important for us.
Thank you. Thank you. Sister right there.
And then we have some on this side.
We're good. Okay.
How you doing? I'm Miriam from Miriam's Marketing.
Sorry.
Miriam from Miriam's Marketing Company and Art Socialize, and we have a Black and Melanated Film Group on Meetup. I had a question that's maybe a little flip to marry within to his. When it comes to the blood quantum laws for the Native American community, we have our Afro-Natives, just like there's Afro-Brazilian and such like that. However, Gabriela brought up that there is a history that comes along with that where the ancestors might not want us to, I guess, come into those new terms. What do you say to them if they want to come to your StoryCorps and talk about the adopting into the black comments or the black word or definition and how that marries into the blood quantum law that actually will detract from the Native American world?
You're talking about elders who are...
In the blood quantum law itself, because the elders are still fighting for that, for the tribal people. So I don't know if that's too big of a question or too small of one, but there is still the ancestors who are still on their tribal land that are saying, well, I don't want to become or adopt into the black because there is a law for that takes away from our communities.
Mm-hmm. They lose benefits if they classify otherwise? Is that what you're saying?
There's loss more so if they classify as that. So, for instance, nationalization of different tribes depends on how many people and how much of your blood is still counted towards that Native American. So if you're Brazilian, how much of your blood is Brazilian versus how much of your blood is African? Depending on if you're in America, it could detract against your tribal land. And if you only have a certain percentage under probably 40 or 30, your land can be adopted into American law and your tribe will lose your land. Mm-hmm. So I might be educating more so. I am an educator, so it might help.
So my approach with that answer would just be to remind, I'm sure you know as an educator, especially with us being in Philly with so many remnants of black history here, a lot of our ancestors that are in the history books were on the fair skin side because a lot of times that was the only way they were able to have access was to be, almost white passing. And through that, they were able to finesse places for us in the system where we have advantages. And I'd say all that to say, we gotta have to finesse the system where we can. And a lot of times these kind of like categories they put us into are made to put us in situations where we have to decide what parts of ourselves we want to claim. It's a really difficult conflict, I'm sure, to decide, but the real perpetrator here is the person that decided these rules about what people are allowed to have based on what's in their blood. I'll always be mind blown by the fact I got to see my great-grandfather's immigration papers. He came to the States from the Dominican Republic, and it described him on his sheet as dark white. I have no idea what dark white is, but just goes to show they're always moving the goalposts with descriptions and things like that. So it's hard to keep up, but I think being true to ourselves culturally and seeing where we could have our advantages is what matters the most.
Well put. I want to be mindful. We have 5 more minutes, so let's get some folks over.
She's had her hand for a while.
Okay, all right, let's go. You can see it.
So I think we have 1, 2, and then my gentleman standing up in the back.
Esta pregunta es para Gabriela.
Gracias.
Mira, Gaby, mujer, negra, latina, ¿cómo estás haciendo para resistir en este momento donde nos quieren silenciar a las mujeres aquí en Estados Unidos?
pero no nos van a silenciar. They're not going to silence us.
Yeah, this question is for Gabriela. Women being Latina, being Black, what are you doing in your storytelling at this time when they are trying to silence the voices of women?
Gracias por esa pregunta, Ari. Yo te voy a responder en español para que nadie entienda. ¿Entendieron? ¿Entendieron? ¿Se han reído?
Tú respondes a ellos en inglés que yo tengo quien me traduzca en español.
Gracias.
Yes, we can help. She said she's going to respond in Spanish, and y'all will understand. And you'll also know what it feels like to be somebody who doesn't understand the panel.
It was a joke. Thanks for getting it. It's challenging to be on this moment as someone. Many of us feel unwelcome, right, and feel that we need to be limiting ourselves, right? We're talking about free speech, but we're constantly restraining ourselves. Not only speech, people are restraining themselves physically. People are stopping to go, to the market because they're afraid of what can happen. People are starting to live in their lives. People are stopping to go into the hospitals. And I'm going to be very open here because we need to talk about it, and it's important. But we're not. I think that's what, we are rooted in resilience, right? We need to continue to tell our stories. Being afraid is not going to take us anywhere, right? So we'll continue like we always have been, right? We have each other. That's something that my parents would say. At the end of the day, Gabriela, if you go to school, they keep calling you names. You feel alone, because that's how I felt in schools in Brazil. At the end of the day, we have each other. And that's what we have. We have each other. So we'll continue to do our work.
Right, 2 more, and then we're going to wrap this up.
Third row.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience.
My name is Jo Benoit, and I'm a social strategist and clinical psychologist by training. One of the things that I appreciate is hearing how you feel about things, and I want to bring something else into the forefront. What I've learned over the years, I'm 91 years young, is that
you look amazing.
I do not define who you are by not knowing who you are. If you know who you are, the other takes second place. It's not as important. Something that you said, and I wanted to share this because I think it's very important, that words have power. I go out into different senior centers, and I was talking because I planned and designed the SAGE Intergenerational Mentoring Program. And I wanted to have the youth working with these, that you call them seniors and elderly. But I defined myself immediately saying this: if you consider me as elderly, I don't acknowledge it. If you consider me as a senior, it doesn't mean anything to me. I'm a longevous adult. That's what I am. And they start laughing. And I thought that was great. I talked with the seniors on one side about working with the youth. And they said, I don't want to work with the youth. They're on drugs. They don't want to listen, blah, blah, blah. I talked with the youth. I don't want to listen to geezers. They always telling you what to do, and they don't know. But I decided there was one thing that I could say to them. I looked and I started laughing. I said, as a longevous adult, I can say something. You have something in common. You both take drugs. They looked at me, and they started laughing, and then they realized that we can continue. By the way, I also have a memoir, and I also am an author. But they realized that it's what you say and how you present yourself, but most of all, it's how you know who you are. Knowing you is the most invaluable thing that you can ever encounter. And accepting it is exceptional. And I wanted to share that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Before I introduce myself, thank you all for coming here and sharing your stories. My name is Ricky Clover. I'm a content creator. I have my own podcast called Clover Label Live. I interview people like y'all who are content creators. I also developed my own video game in 2016 called Escape from Dragon Dungeon. This is my t-shirt right here, the artwork right here. Anyway, thank y'all for being here, and I would love for y'all to be a guest on my show.
We'd be honored.
All right. To that point, could you go change to the last slide, please? There you go. So, to the point that the gentleman just said, if you want to tell your own story, which I encourage all of you in this room to do so, we have a mechanism for doing that. The simplest way you can do it is take that QR code, download our app, and you can sit in the kitchen with your mother, your father, your children, and you can just tell a story yourself. It's your story. You can do what you will with it. It can become part of our archive if you want it to, or it cannot. You could also just reach out to me. You can just email me if you're interested in more about Brightness in Black and whatever else you want to share with us. We're open. We're an open door for that. So to that, thank you all again for this wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Before we go, just want to remind people that there's a Brightness in Black table upstairs if you haven't want to get some of our material. There's also an opportunity for you to have a signature conversation with our Brightness in Black fellows. So you can use the app, but you can also have a signature conversation. And we'd be remiss not to thank the Jordan brand and the Jordan Family Foundation, as well as the Hearthland Foundation for their continued support of Brightness in Black.
So thank you all. And thank you, Chris, for doing my job for me.